On my 25th birthday, my parents took me to dinner to disown me. You were never ours, Mom smiled. We kept you for the checks they stopped today. Dad slid the papers over. I didn't cry. I said, turn around. My real family's 3 tables back. Mom turned, and her smile died. My mother ordered the sea base before she told me I wasn't her daughter. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Not the words, the sequence. She flagged the waiter, said, the sea bass, no capers, handed back the menu with 2 fingers like she was returning something defective, and only then turned to me and said, we need to talk about your future, Paige. Capers first, daughter second. That was the whole hierarchy of Diane Mercer's heart laid out on a white tablecloth, and I'd had 25 years to learn how to read it. She was wearing the gray cashmere, the funeral gray. The one she saved for occasions where she wanted to look like grief had refined her. Her lipstick was a shade called Quiet Rosewood. I knew because I'd bought it for her 2 Christmases ago, and she'd said, oh, this brand, in the voice she used for things that disappointed her quietly. She folded her hands. She smiled. And I want to be clear about the smile, because everything I'm about to tell you lives inside it. It wasn't nervous. It wasn't the brittle thing people do before bad news. It was practiced. It had the smoothness of a thing, rehearsed in a mirror until the muscles stopped fighting it. My mother had stood somewhere, her bathroom probably, the one with the good light, and arranged her face to deliver this. She had decided in advance to enjoy it. You're adopted, she said. I didn't blink. I want to tell you I was destroyed. That would be the honest emotional beat for the cameras. But the truth is quieter and worse. I felt something click. A lock turning in a door I'd been pressed against my whole life without knowing it was there, because I already knew. I'd known for 6 months, and 3 tables behind my mother's left shoulder, a woman named Susan was watching the back of Diane Mercer's head, holding a folded napkin in both hands, waiting for me to give the signal. My mother just hadn't turned around yet. Let me back up. Let me tell you who I am, so you understand I'm not the kind of person who blows up her own life for drama. I'm a paralegal. Trusts and estates, 8 years, the last 4 at a firm called Hartwell & Boyd in a building downtown with a lobby that smells like cold marble and other people's money. I am very good at my job. The thing nobody tells you about trusts and estates is that it's not really about death. It's about what people decide you're worth when they think no one's looking, when they're alone with a pen and a notary and the quiet math of their own affection. I read those documents all day. I learned to read faces the same way, as filings. So when my mother called me 3 weeks before my birthday, sweet in a way she hadn't been since I was small enough to be cute, my first reaction was not warmth, it was suspicion. Let's celebrate 25 properly, honey, she said. You only turned 25 once. Your father and I want to take you somewhere nice. Honey. She hadn't called me honey since I was 9. I know exactly when it stopped, because I can tell you about birthdays in that house. 1 candle, a grocery store cupcake, the kind that comes 4 to a plastic clamshell that she never bothered to refrigerate, so the frosting always had that slightly sweating room temperature shine. She'd press the single candle in, light it, and sing maybe 2/3 of the song before deciding she'd done enough. My cousin Brett, meanwhile, Aunt Renee's son, got a bounce house on the lawn one year, a caterer with chafing dishes, a magician the year he turned 8, who pulled a real rabbit out of a hat and let all the kids pet it. I stood at the back of that party in a hand-me-down dress and watched Brett blow out a number 8 candle the size of my forearm. I asked my mother that night why Brett got a magician. She was scrubbing a pan. She didn't even turn around. Brett's family, Paige, she said. Real family looks after its own. I was 8. I didn't have the vocabulary yet for what she'd just done, but I had the feeling. And the feeling taught me arithmetic faster than any teacher. A child who asks for less costs less. A child who needs nothing is free. So I made myself free. By 9, I had stopped asking for parties, for new shoes, for the second helping. I became easy. Being easy was the only currency I had, and I spent it carefully for years, buying a thing I never actually received, which was for them to want me. So no. When Diane Mercer suddenly wanted to take me somewhere nice, I did not feel flattered. When Diane Mercer gets generous, I promise you, a spreadsheet somewhere has told her it'll pay off. So I made some calls of my own. Here's the part where 2 envelopes change everything. They landed in the same week, 6 months before that dinner. March. I remember because March is my birthday month, and I've always hated March a little, the way you hate a song that was playing during something bad. The first envelope was handwritten, no return address, forwarded through an adoption registry I'd signed up for years earlier and then forgotten about, the way you sign up for things at 2 a.m. and tell no one. It was from a woman named Susan. She was 19 when she had me, she wrote. 19 and alone and told by everyone in her life that giving me up was the loving thing, the mature thing, the thing she'd thank herself for later. She wrote that she'd believed them for about a day and a half and then spent 25 years not believing them at all. She wrote that she'd married a good man named Carl, that she had 2 other kids, my brothers, she wrote, and I had to put the letter down for a second at that word, and that not one of them had ever filled the specific shape I'd left. At the bottom, under her name, she'd written 1 line. I have it memorized. I'll have it memorized when I'm 90. I never stopped saving you a seat. I read that letter 11 times the first night. The second envelope was typed, official, county letterhead. It was about a trust. My grandmother's trust. Nana Ruth. I should tell you about Nana Ruth because she's the reason any of this had teeth. Ruth Mercer was my father's mother, and she was the only person in that entire bloodline who ever treated me like a person instead of a line item. She'd take me to the diner on Route 9 and let me order the chocolate cream pie and the cheeseburger. No negotiation. And when I'd hesitate, because by then I was trained to hesitate and she'd say, "Order it, baby. You're allowed to take up room." She died when I was 23, pancreatic, fast. I was the only Mercer who cried at the reception, which everyone noticed, and which my mother later described as making a scene. The county letter said I was a beneficiary of Ruth Mercer's trust, and that, as I was approaching the age of distribution, the trustee was required to provide notice. I read it as a daughter at first, then I read it again as a paralegal, and the second read made my hands go cold. I requested the full instrument. I'm allowed to. I was a named beneficiary, and even if I hadn't been, I know exactly which form gets you a certified copy and exactly how politely to ask. It came in 9 business days, 41 pages. I read all of them at my kitchen table at 1 in the morning with a glass of wine I never touched. And there, in Article 6, in language I'd typed 1,000 variations of for other families, was my grandmother's voice reaching out of the ground to fix something while she still could. She had set up a caregiver provision. For 25 years, my parents had been receiving monthly distributions from Ruth Mercer's trust. The house we lived in, the one I'd grown up in, the one with the kitchen where my mother told me Brett was real family, was owned by the trust. They lived in it rent-free. They drew an allowance. All of it was structured, in the cold, clean language of the document, as compensation for the care, housing, and raising of the minor beneficiary, Paige. They had been getting paid to raise me for 2 decades, and then I got to the sentence. The one Nana put there in her own notarized handwriting, witnessed, dated, airtight, the kind of clause I'd have praised in a seminar: caregiver payments to Wesley and Diane Mercer shall terminate upon the beneficiary's 25th birthday. The remainder of the trust corpus, including the residence, shall pass in full and outright to my granddaughter, Paige. Outright. To me, the house, the remainder, everything. On my 25th birthday, I sat at that table for a long time, long enough that the wine went warm and the window went from black to gray, and I understood 3 things in order, the way you understand a will once you've read enough of them. 1. My parents had spent my entire childhood being paid a salary to perform a love they did not feel, and they had resented me for the bookkeeping of it the whole time. The cupcakes weren't poverty. They were spite. They had the money. Nana had made sure they had the money. They just didn't think I was worth spending it on, and they got to keep the difference. 2. The gravy train stopped on my birthday, the exact date, to the day. 3. The only thing standing between them and a furious scramble to keep what they could was me not finding out in time. Which is why, 3 weeks before that birthday, my mother suddenly wanted to take me somewhere nice. They didn't want to celebrate me. They wanted my signature. I'm going to walk you through what they tried, because the craft of it is almost impressive, in the way a well-built trap is impressive right up until you notice your foot in it. After the adoption sentence, after the smile, my father did the thing I knew he'd do. He'd been quiet. Wesley Mercer is always quiet. He lets Diane hold the knife, but now he reached down beside his chair and slid a folder across the white tablecloth. Manila, new, the little metal clasp still shiny. "We've already filed," he said. "You won't be in the will. We wanted to do this cleanly." Cleanly. He'd practiced that word too. I could hear the rehearsal in it, the slight over-pronunciation people get when a word has been chosen rather than felt. "We thought it was kinder to be direct," my mother added, smoothing her napkin. "You're an adult now. You can stand on your own. We've done our part. Our part. 25 years of salary," she meant. She just couldn't say it that way. Then she did the thing that told me they'd planned the whole sequence. She slid one more page out of the folder, a single sheet, and she set a pen on top of it, angled toward me. "Consider it, like a stewardess offering a customs form. Just sign that you understand," she said. "Then we can all have a civilized dinner. There's no need for any of this to be ugly, Paige." I looked at the page, and here's the thing they didn't account for. They knew I was a paralegal. They'd told people for years, with a little curl of condescension, that Paige does paperwork for lawyers. What they never understood is that doing paperwork for lawyers means I have read this exact document, in this exact register, hundreds of times. I have drafted this document. I know what it is the way a locksmith knows a pick. It was not an acknowledgement. The top paragraph was friendly. "I, Paige Mercer, acknowledge that I have been informed of my parents' decisions regarding their estate." Harmless. A throat clearing. But the second paragraph, the one your eye glides past because the first one relaxed you, contained the word waive, and then the words "any and all claims, present or future, against the assets, estates, instruments, or trusts of Wesley Mercer, Diane Mercer, or their predecessors in interest." Predecessors in interest. That's the phrase that pays. That's lawyer for the people they inherited from. That's Nana Ruth. They were trying to get me to sign away my grandmother's trust before I knew it existed, dressed up as a sad little napkin-side acknowledgement that mommy and daddy don't love me. The disownment wasn't the cruelty. The disownment was the anesthetic. They wanted me crying and humiliated and desperate to flee the table, so I'd scrawl my name on anything to make it stop. I left the pen where it lay. "Aren't you going to sign it?" my mother asked. "Not yet," I said. I reached down to my own bag and set my own folder on the table, beside my plate. Letter size. A little worn at the corners because I'd been carrying it for 6 months like an engine I hadn't turned on yet. It had a tab on it. 4 letters, in my own handwriting. Ruth. My father's eyes went to it, and I watched him read it. I watched the 4 letters land. I watched Wesley Mercer, a man who had never in his life done emotional math fast, start, very slowly, to do some. Before I tell you how I turned it around, I have to tell you about the calls I made, because I didn't just sit on this for 6 months. I built it. The first call was to an estate attorney named Marion Acosta. Not from my firm. you don't soil your own nest. Marion had 22 years in probate litigation and a reputation in our little legal community as the person you hire when a family is about to detonate and you want to be the one holding the detonator. I'd worked across a closing from her twice. She remembered me. She agreed to take a meeting. I brought her the 41 pages. She read for 11 minutes without speaking, which from Marion is practically a hug, and then she set the document down and said, "Sweetheart, this trust is a fortress. Whoever drafted this knew exactly what they were preventing." She tapped the caregiver clause. "Your grandmother didn't trust your parents. She built this so they couldn't touch the corpus and couldn't keep you from it. The only way they get any of it is if you give it to them voluntarily, like by signing a waiver," I said. She looked at me over her glasses. "Has someone tried to get you to sign a waiver?" "Not yet," I said, "but they will. On my birthday." Marion smiled, and it was nothing like my mother's smile. "Then we are going to be ready," she said. The second person was Ellis Bouchard, the trust officer at the bank that served as corporate co-trustee. 31 years in fiduciary services, the kind of man who irons his shirts on Sunday for the whole week. I'd assumed going in that the bank would be sleepy and indifferent. It wasn't. When I laid out what I suspected my parents might attempt, getting a beneficiary to waive rights to a trust without disclosing the trust's existence, Ellis's whole face changed. "That would be fraudulent inducement," he said, "and it would expose the trust to a contest we are obligated to defend against. Ms. Mercer, I'm glad you came to me." He pulled the distribution file. 25 years of records. Every payment to Wesley and Diane Mercer. Every reimbursement, every withdrawal against the house. Documented, stamped, filed. Chain of custody, Ellis called it. And the phrase landed in me like a coin in a slot. The third was Susan. I'd written her back the same week her letter came, and we'd been talking ever since. Phone calls that ran past midnight, then a lunch, then a second lunch, then a dinner where I met Carl and my two brothers, Danny and Theo, who hugged me like they'd been waiting at a window. The first time Susan saw me in person, she put both hands over her mouth and said, "You have my mother's hands." I'd spent my whole life with people telling me I looked like nobody. To be told I had someone's hands, I had to go to the restaurant bathroom and put myself back together. So when I started building the folder, I told Susan about the dinner, about the trap I knew was coming. And Susan, who had spent 25 years saving me a seat, said the thing that turned my plan from defense into something with a spine. "Then we'll be there, behind her, so that when she finishes telling you that you have no family, you can turn around and look at the people who do." I booked the reservation myself. I am, after all, a person who is good at logistics. 3 tables behind my mother's chair. I gave the hostess Susan's name and a 20 and a story about a surprise. It was a surprise. It just wasn't the one my mother thought she was hosting. Back at the table, my folder sat there with its 4-letter tab, and my father couldn't stop looking at it. And my mother, who hadn't seen it yet, who was still running her script, leaned forward and snapped, "Aren't you going to say something?" That was the moment her plan started dying, and she could feel it, because the girl was supposed to be sobbing by now. The girl was supposed to be folded over the table, signing anything. Instead, the girl was calm, and the girl had a folder. And Diane Mercer, who needed me devastated to win, was looking at a daughter who was not devastated at all. Then the cavalry arrived for the wrong side. Aunt Renee swept in with Brett, and let me be clear, this was staged. This was their cameo. They'd been waiting in the bar. Renee in a sequined top, Brett at 30 looking exactly like he had at 8, soft and sure he was owed something. "Oh, are we interrupting?" Renee sang, pulling out a chair she had no intention of not sitting in. She put a hand on my shoulder, warm as a knife in soup. "Paige, sweetheart, we just want you to know, there's no hard feelings. Blood looks after blood. You understand." I looked up at the woman who, 22 years earlier, had let her son have a magician while I watched from the back in a borrowed dress, and I felt the last thread of it, the obligation, the hope, the 25-year-old account I'd kept open in case they ever decided to pay, go slack, not snap, slack, like a rope when the weight finally comes off. I turned to my father. I used the voice I use at the firm, the flat, almost gentle one I use when I found the flaw in someone's filing, and I'm about to make them see it too. It's not a loud voice. It's worse than loud. "Dad," I said, "which instrument did you file under? Your estate or Nana's trust?" The table went still. My mother's wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. A bead of condensation ran down it and dropped to the cloth, because in 8 words I had told them everything. I'd told them I knew the difference between an estate and a trust. I'd told them I knew which one mattered. And I'd told them I'd known long enough to learn to say it cold, without a tremor, like a person reading off a form. What are you talking about?" my mother whispered. The quiet rosewood smile was gone. What was under it was much older and much uglier. I didn't answer her. I turned the folder around, and I opened it. 3 pages. I'd told you that. 3 pages because 3 pages is all it took. And Marion had taught me that the strongest filing is the shortest one. Page 1 was a certified copy of Article 6 of the Ruth Mercer Family Trust. I'd highlighted 2 lines in yellow, the caregiver payment line, and the line beneath it, "The remainder shall pass in full and outright to my granddaughter, Paige." I turned it so my father could read it right side up. "You've been paid to raise me," I said, quiet, conversational, "both of you. Every month for 25 years. The house is Nana's. The allowance was Nana's. You've been living on a salary, and the salary was me." I tapped the highlighted line, and it stopped today, on my birthday, to the day. "That's why we're here. Not to disown me. You can't disown what was never yours to keep. You're here because the money stops at midnight, and you need my name on a waiver before I find out it ever existed. My father had gone the color of the tablecloth. My mother recovered first. She always does. She's a fighter, I'll give her that. It's the only thing of hers I ever wanted and never got. That trust is contested, she hissed. You don't understand the situation. Your grandmother wasn't well at the end. She didn't know what she was signing. We have grounds. I turned to page 2. Page 2 was a letter from Marion Acosta on letterhead, addressed to Wesley and Diane Mercer, that they were now receiving for the first time in front of an audience. It noted, in the dry, devastating prose of a litigator who has already won, that Ms. Acosta represented the beneficiary, that any attempt to procure a waiver of trust rights through non-disclosure of the trust would constitute fraudulent inducement, that the corporate co-trustee was in possession of 25 years of complete distribution records, and that the trust was prepared to seek a full accounting of all funds drawn by Wesley and Diane Mercer, including any sums diverted from the care of the beneficiary for which they were specifically compensated. That last clause was mine. I'd asked Marion to add it. She'd raised an eyebrow and said, "You want to make them sweat about the cupcakes?" And I'd said, "I want them to sweat about all of it." She added it. My mother read the letter. I watched her get to fraudulent inducement and then full accounting, and I watched the math arrive. Because there had been diversions. There's always diversions. 25 years of being handed money to raise a child you resent, and you tell me Diane Mercer never once spent the child's clothing allowance on herself, the bounce house, the caterer for Brett. Where do you think the magician came from? Aunt Renee had gone very quiet. Brett was looking at his phone with the intensity of a man pretending to be somewhere else. And then, page 3. Page 3 wasn't legal. Page 3 was a single sheet of paper with one line on it, photocopied from the letter I'd carried in my wallet for 6 months. I never stopped saving you a seat. You told me I had no family, I said. My voice did something on the word family. Finally. The first crack in it all evening. And I let it crack because it was the one true thing I'd say at that table. You told me I was a benefit, a line item. You spent 25 years making sure I knew exactly how little I was worth, and you billed my grandmother for the privilege. I stood up. But you got one fact wrong tonight. You said I don't have a family. I picked up my folder and held it against my chest. I do. I found them 6 months ago. And then I said the sentence I'd been carrying longer than the folder. They're sitting 3 tables behind you. My mother turned around slowly. I watched it happen in stages, the way the best collapses do. First, she turned because she thought I was bluffing. A quick, contemptuous glance. There's no one there, Paige. Don't be theatrical. Then her eyes found the table, found a woman in a blue dress who had stood up, found Susan, who had my hands, who was looking at the back of Diane Mercer's head with 25 years in her eyes, and beside her Carl and Danny and Theo, all of them on their feet now, all of them looking at me. And my mother's face did the thing I'd waited my whole life to see, and didn't enjoy nearly as much as I'd imagined. It stopped being a face. It became just an arrangement of features that had finally run out of script. Here's what happened after, because you want the consequences, and you've earned them. Susan crossed the restaurant. She didn't even look at my mother. That's the part that I think hurt Diane the most, actually, being not looked at. She came straight to me and put her arms around me and said into my hair, "Happy birthday, baby. We saved you a seat." And I walked away from the table where I'd spent my whole life trying to be cheap enough to love, and I sat down at a table 3 rows back where someone had ordered me a slice of chocolate cream pie because Susan had asked, on a hunch from a story I'd told her once, what my favorite dessert was when I was a kid. I told you March was the song that played during something bad. It's not anymore. They changed the station. The legal part took 11 months because the law is slow and grief is slow, and Diane Mercer does not lose gracefully. They did file a contest of Nana's trust, the she wasn't well at the end gambit. It collapsed almost immediately because Ellis Bouchard produced the file, and the file included the recording of Ruth Mercer's capacity assessment, conducted by her own attorney with a physician present, 8 months before she died, in which my grandmother says, on tape, clear as a bell, "My son and his wife are not to get a dime of the remainder. They've been paid to do the bare minimum for that girl, and they've resented every dollar. Paige gets the house. Put it in writing. Make it impossible." The voice on the tape was Nana Ruth's, reaching out of the ground, making it impossible. The full accounting Marion threatened turned into a full accounting the court ordered. It found that over the years my parents had diverted a sum the forensic accountant put at just over $290,000 from funds designated for my care and education into things that were emphatically not my care or education. There was a settlement. I won't bore you with the figures. I'll tell you that the house is mine now, free and clear, and that the first thing I did was rip out the kitchen, the specific kitchen, the one with the good light and the bad memory, and rebuild it. And the first thing I baked in it was a real cake, from scratch, that Susan and I made together, with as many candles as I wanted. My father didn't fight it past the first round. Somewhere in the deposition, he just deflated. The last thing he ever said to me directly was, during a break in that deposition, in a courthouse hallway, when he caught me by the water fountain and said, "I never thought she'd actually leave it to you. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I was wrong. Just surprise, 25 years late, that the line item had a name in someone's heart. My mother and I do not speak. The last I heard, she and my father had moved into a rented condo across town. They had to. The house was mine. And Aunt Renee, who had spent decades positioning Brett to inherit by proxy, had cooled on the friendship the moment the well went dry. Blood looks after blood, I suppose, right up until blood costs money. Brett, last I checked, is doing fine. Brett always does fine. That's the thing about being someone's favorite for no reason. You You never have to become anything. I don't wish him ill. I just stopped standing at the back of his party. People ask me if it felt good. The turning of the folder. The moment my mother's face stopped being a face. The honest answer is no, not the way you'd think. There's no rush in watching someone who is supposed to love you discover they bet wrong. There's just a kind of quiet, like a machine you've been running your whole life finally shutting off, and the sound it leaves behind is your own breathing. What felt good came later, and it was smaller. It was Theo, my littlest brother, calling me at 11 at night to ask if a girl liked him back, because he wanted his sister's opinion, and apparently I was now the keeper of that office. It was Susan teaching me her mother's bread recipe, the hands I inherited, finally doing something with the dough they were built for. It was a birthday this past March, my 26th, where I sat at a long table with people who were happy, actually happy, with no rehearsed smiles, and Carl stood up and made a toast that he botched halfway through because he got choked up, and nobody minded, because nobody at that table was keeping score. I spent 25 years trying to make myself small enough to be afforded. It turns out I was never the expense. I was the inheritance. And the woman who tried to tell me, in funeral gray, with a practiced smile, that no one had ever saved me a seat, she had to turn around in her own chair to find out she was the only one at that table sitting alone.